this is African View with me, Yodit Admasu. In this edition, we are going to talk about African journalism. Where is the media going, where it started? And to talk about this, I have an expert with me who started out as a journalist himself, and now he is the founder and chairperson of a big media outlet, APO. His name is Nicolas Pomigne-Mognard. Welcome.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you. And let's start with your journalistic background. How you started as a journalist. Why did you see the need to create APO?
Well, I started as a local reporter, reporting on really the local stories, the party in the schools and the events in the community and stuff like this. And at first I was covering only a small geography, and then I expanded. A few years after, I was appointed as a correspondent for Europe, covering entire Europe for Gabon News, which is a Gabonese media outlet in Gabon in Central Africa. And as a correspondent for Europe, I was reporting on really everything which is happening related to Africa in Europe. And one of the things I did within the first months when I started in that new position is that you see, I was supposed to report on anything from culture to sport to diplomacy to etc. related to Africa and across Europe. So obviously it was challenging. You cannot just browse on all the websites of all the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Europe all the time, plus monitor the cultural activity, plus etc. etc. So obviously I started to subscribe to press releases. I said, well, okay, I want to receive their communication. I want to receive their press releases, their Africa-related press releases. If the Under Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany is traveling to Ghana, I want to know it because I may want to report on it. And so I started working on that, contacting all this organization from Ministry of Foreign Affairs of all the European countries, but also obviously in Europe you have the European Commission, you have the European Parliament. In Roma, in Italy, you have a lot of UN institutions like the FAO. You have the UNESCO in Paris. So many organizations. Not to mention, the think tanks and think tanks, etc. So a lot of organizations. So I started contacting all of them and asked them to, how I could receive their press releases and news releases and announcement and agenda and stuff. And I find it very difficult. I find it very time-consuming, and I actually remember it was back in 2007, and some people will just tell me, well, if you want to have access to our press release, why don't you just go on our website? Like if I could go on their website, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a day to see if by any chance they added a press release, So sometimes it was the answer. The other time, another time you will have to literally chase to call, I don't know, 15 times during 3 weeks to actually finally talk to the right person and to literally beg that person to add your email address to the media list, etc., etc. So I find that I really found that very, very time-consuming, hard, challenging. And so an idea, came to my mind, which is, well, if it's so difficult for me as a correspondent in Europe to get the press releases from European-based organizations, what does that tell me about the press releases, the news releases of the African institutions? Meaning, are the press releases of the African Development Bank, of the African Union Commission, we are here in Addis, of the Pan-African Parliament, of the regional bank, the West African Development Bank, etc., are they reaching the international media community? And so I did a test. I said, well, listen, I'll I'll try to, during a few days, I'll try to myself subscribe to the press releases of those organizations, the African organizations. And well, I found that it was even more challenging than to get the European press release, the press release from the European organization. So it was very complicated, which obviously led me to the conclusion that most of the press releases of most of the African organizations never reached the international media community. Now, in the meantime, I was having a series of meetings with the president of the African Development Bank at the time, Donald Kaberuka, and I think between 2005 and 2008, we probably met 3-4 times a year. And each time I would, at the end of discussion, I would ask him, okay, how is Africa doing? Because of course he had access to a lot of information, you know. So is Africa doing, etc. And I remember the day when he told me, well, listen, we find something amazing. Our studies show that apparently there is a middle class emerging in Africa. And you need to realize what that means. That means that those customers will need banks, cars, etc., etc. And so we discussed about that, and we were both very excited about that. But remember that at the time, the narrative about Africa was all about, you know, AIDS and misery, and you know.
It was not a very good image that you are trying to make is really good and relevant, because as a journalist, that's one of the problems that I have faced, you know, when we try to do some research on some institutions, their websites is not up to date, or when you ask for an interview or press release, that person is not available all of a sudden. So it's not only for the Europeans, but for African.
Because the institution or the government who is more likely give an interview to an international media. No, I know. It's a shame. It's the same for advertising, which is even worse, right? So you will see a government putting an advertisement on a. Well, I don't want to mention names, but you know what I'm talking about. And so, coming back to that discussion as with Donald Kaberuka, the idea was, okay, we're all very excited about that, and we say, well, now we need to tell the world. The world need to know that something is happening. So it's not. We have proof that it's not only misery and AIDS and etc. So how do we make sure the world knows? And so that's really where I decided to create an APO group, originally as a press release distribution service. So very simply, what I did is from my living room, I stopped working as a journalist, and I focused for months on this. And what I did is that at first I contacted very meticulously, one after the other, one step after the other, all the African institutions I can identify. Regional organization, Pan-African organization, etc. And I begged them to send me their news releases and their press releases. And I ended up, within a span of a few months, I don't know, 3 or 6 months, I ended up with receiving the press releases from, I don't remember exactly, but probably 60 organizations. And with that, I will receive the press release, and some will send the press release in a PDF format, and some will send in Word format, some will made available via RSS feed or some, etc. So I will standardize everything, put all this in the same format, and then I will end up with a feed of news releases related to Africa. And then what I did is that I went to Bloomberg, and I went to Bloomberg and I said, listen, how would you like to have a feed of news releases issued by some of the most prestigious African organizations and institutions for free, and you will be able to resell that content to your subscribers. And they say, well, if it's free, you know.
What would you get out of it?
What I get out of it is that I was already definitely participating to changing the narrative about the continent. I was making the content available. The international media were not anymore in a position to say, we cannot see that there is also good news. The reason why 100% of our media coverage of Africa is bad is because we don't have access to good news. They couldn't say that anymore. They just had to go to Bloomberg, and we will see the press release from the African Development Bank saying that the projection, the forecast for next year, overall of the continent is 3.5%. They cannot ignore it anymore. So what I get out of it in terms of business, well, that's how I started the business. When I didn't start it as a business, as you can imagine. It's really the idea was to change the narrative about Africa. I find the situation very unfair, because if you look at it in terms of volume of noise, let's say, of media, at the time you would have probably, on a global scale, most of the noise, most of the information about Africa was actually created by the international media, by non-African media, let's say, most of them available globally, because we never had that African media which has the ability to spread not only in the neighboring country but across the world. And most of that content was negative about Africa. Now, well, we could say that maybe they had an excuse, and the excuse was that they didn't know where to find good news. Suddenly, the good news were available on Bloomberg terminal. And the partnership we had with Bloomberg was not with the Bloomberg as a media. It was with the Bloomberg business part, which is the Bloomberg terminal, which is that terminal you find in stock exchanges across the world. Yeah? So we very fast signed it with Bloomberg, which means that the content was available in literally all the stock exchanges across the world. And then we signed with Thomson Reuters Acon, which is the older terminal. So when you have an agreement with Bloomberg Terminal and Thomson Reuters Acon, you are literally covering all the stock exchanges across the world. And then we signed it with LexisNexis, with Dow Jones Factiva, which are the two leading news aggregators in the world. And then we continue to expand. And as we speak, we have a network of 270 websites which are hosting our content, including CNBC Africa website, or Africa News website, which is a subsidiary of Euronews, but also the rest are African indigenous websites in all parts of the continent, in all type of languages. We have our content available on mobiles, on 250 million mobiles across Africa, etc., etc. So that's how it all started. It started with it didn't start as a business. It started with that idea that the treatment of Africa in the media was unfair, and that idea that the good news needed a boost. We needed to be sure they will reach the international media community. So that's how it started.
Okay, that's well and good. And we'll talk about its status right now and your future prospects. But now I want to focus on you also give trainings. You are here in Ethiopia to give trainings to Addis Ababa University and Mekelle, you told me. And I want to talk about journalism. You know, there are different aspects to journalism, and mostly in Ethiopia we kind of follow the developmental kind of journalism, the DJ. How do you see that, you know, for African media outlets, journalism that's based on development, that focus on the positive as well as the progressive kind of aspect, you know, to kind of give a correction for the government. You know, this is wrong, this is appreciable, that kind of thing, instead of sensationalizing everything and making it look bad. As an expert, how do you see the journalism in Africa?
Well, first, before we discuss about the way it's going, first I would like to remind that back in 2012, the World Bank organized the very first, and I'm afraid it actually remained the first. It was the inaugural one, but I don't think they had more after that. World Congress on Communication for Development. And if I remember properly, it was 2012. And during that period, And I think now it's you know, there is I can disclose that. I remember, so it was in 2000, well, probably 9 or something. I have a meeting with President Kaberuka, President of the African Development Bank at the time, and we sit, and he's telling me, okay, something has changed. I had a meeting with the general manager of the IMF. I had a meeting with the president of the World Bank, and that idea that we can impose, we can decree good governance, we can force the African government or presidents good governance policy and to do, you know, to avoid corruption and bribe, etc. That idea that we can force them to do it. We gathered World Bank, IMF, African Development Bank at the highest level, and we just decided that it's not working. And so I was deputy president of the Pan-African Press Association at the time, and so President Kaberuka told me, well, then the plan now is to rely on the media to make the government accountable. And now we need a stronger media landscape, because the media will be the one which are going to, by spreading the news, by doing investigative journalism, etc., which are going to promote good governance, and also participate to that idea of communication for development. The very maybe now it's forgotten. But the question of communication for development, what it was really, it was implemented, created by the donors, so the European Commission, World Bank, etc. And the idea was that, well, Ethiopia is receiving a donation or aid for development of 5 billion or 5 million to create a bridge or whatever. Okay, who is going to go take pictures and check a few months after if that bridge is actually there? If not the media. That was the point. The very concept of communication for development, it was about that. It was about having a strong media landscape, having strong media, because they are the one which are going to say, okay, citizens, people, look, we received millions for that bridge. The bridge is not there. You know? And it is actually after that, a few years after that, that we started speaking so much about civil society. And it's kind of cheap, but and of course right now civil society can rely on social media, but there was a time where all the institutions were focusing on the media. They were betting on the media landscape to take the government accountable. Then you had the civil society, but it was before the surge of social media and stuff. So that civil society during a few years was relying on the traditional media to be heard, etc. And then right now, of course, with the social media, we saw how it works, and of course they can do things on their own with